The flashlight was already in her face when Major Naomi Carter rolled down the window halfway, like protocol taught her. No greeting. No explanation. Just a beam of artificial light cutting into her eyes and a voice that skipped civility altogether. License and registration. The demand wasn't loud, but it carried something colder than volume: entitlement. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. She wasn't even in a civilian vehicle. The black government-issued SUV was clean, quiet, and tagged with federal plates. Naomi had been on the road less than 10 minutes, driving back from a late meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve, heading north through Toledo, Ohio. She'd done this drive a dozen times before, uneventful, forgettable. But this wasn't a night for silence. Officer Kyle Trent had been sitting idle off Reynolds Road, bored, waiting. 15 years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, and tonight, his instinct told him that the unfamiliar vehicle, tinted just enough to obscure the driver's face, was suspicious. Not illegal. Not reckless. Just off. So he acted. Lights on. The siren chirped once. Power compressed into sound. Naomi pulled over without hesitation. Calm. Composed. She kept her hands on the wheel, glanced once in the mirror, and waited. No fear. But alert. Always alert. Trent approached fast, hand resting unnecessarily on his holster. No passenger side protocol, no effort to de-escalate. Just the dominant stride of someone used to not being questioned. Naomi met his gaze through the glare. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "You were drifting between lanes. No signal. Looked like you might be impaired." Her brow lifted slightly. "I wasn't." Her voice was steady. Flat. "License and registration." Louder this time. No room for discussion. She moved slowly, deliberately, and handed over both documents. "I'm a federal employee." "That's a government vehicle." Trent glanced at the ID. "Military?" "Yes." A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was." The air thickened. Something unspoken passed between them. Not fear. Not defiance. Just presence. Naomi's kind of presence. The kind that didn't shrink. Trent didn't like it. He stepped back, angled toward the door. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." And just like that, a line was drawn. Naomi didn't move right away. Not out of defiance, but precision. "On what grounds?" she asked, eyes forward, voice even. "I've complied. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to understand why you're escalating this." Trent's jaw clenched. "Now you're refusing a lawful order." "No," she replied calmly, "I'm asking for clarification." That single sentence was enough to shift his stance. He didn't reply. He simply reached forward and opened her door himself. The gesture wasn't violent, but it was loud. Loud in intent. Loud in the message. That was the moment Naomi turned on her phone camera and hit record. "For the record," she said quietly, "this interaction is being documented." For a flicker of a second, his eyes darted to the phone. Hesitation, barely perceptible, but it was there. Still, he pressed on. Out of the car. She stepped out. Not aggressive. Not submissive. Simply present. The uniform was tucked away in a duffel bag in the back seat, but it might as well have been on her shoulders. She stood tall. Not to prove anything, but because that's who she was. Trent made her walk a straight line under the yellow street lamp glow. Had her count backwards. Raise each leg. The test wasn't about safety. It was about control. And Naomi passed every single step with quiet clarity. Her balance is perfect. Her speech was clear. Her breath was steady. He still wrote her a citation. Failure to maintain lane, he muttered as he handed over the paper. No explanation. No apology. Just dismissal. Naomi took the ticket without a word. Just one look, cool and unreadable, and slid back into the SUV. The door closed softly. Not a slam. Just finality. Trent watched her drive away, unaware that his shift had just changed forever. Unaware that the woman he stopped was more than a face behind glass. That her silence wasn't surrender. That the phone in her hand held more weight than he imagined. He logged the citation that night like all the others. Generic. Routine. Just another entry in the system. But Naomi wasn't done. She didn't curse. Didn't rant. Didn't spiral. She documented. She filed. And she had receipts. Back at her base in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Naomi sat quietly at her desk the next morning. The video clip was already uploaded, time-stamped, and backed up in 3 locations. She didn't send it to the press. She didn't tweet. She sent it to her legal officer and requested a formal consultation. She wasn't angry because she'd been stopped. She was angry because of how easily it happened. Because even with decades of service, a spotless record, and a command that spanned continents, all it took to reduce her to suspicion was tinted windows and a slow lane change. Sergeant Malik Owens knocked lightly before stepping in. "Ma'am. Just checking in." Naomi looked up, expression controlled. "I'm fine." "You sure?" He hesitated. "Saw the footage." "I've already contacted legal," she said. "We're proceeding." He nodded slowly. "You want to keep it internal, or?" "I want accountability," she said. "I'm not interested in headlines." She meant it. Naomi Carter didn't raise her voice when challenged. She didn't need to. Her calm was more commanding than most people's fury. Over 20 years of leading soldiers taught her that volume wasn't power, clarity was. But last night wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a test. Of the system. Of assumptions. Of how power shifts when a woman like her, black, composed, in control, refuses to break the script. And now that test was going to court. Officer Kyle Trent had no idea what he triggered. He didn't know who she was. Didn't ask. Didn't care. His ego, sharpened by years of unchecked authority, had overridden caution. And for the first time, that habit was going to cost him. Because Naomi Carter wasn't just defending herself. She was building something bigger. A public record. A message. A moment that couldn't be erased or ignored. The kind of moment that cracked the silence. The kind that made people in power, finally, look twice. And this was just the beginning. Officer Kyle Trent didn't see a lieutenant colonel when he pulled her over. He saw a woman in a black SUV with a calm voice and too many questions. That alone, in his world, was a threat. He didn't process her tone, not defiant, just firm. He didn't pause at the way she moved, measured, deliberate, disciplined. And when she told him she was military, it only made him double down. Authority didn't impress him. It challenged him. So when she asked again, respectfully, for clarification on why she was being removed from her vehicle, he made a decision. Not based on protocol. Not based on risk. Based on pride. He reached forward, opened her door, and demanded again, louder this time, "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." And she did. But not like he expected. Naomi Carter didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or raise her voice. She stepped out like a soldier dismounting, shoulders squared, eyes forward, posture straight. The camera phone was still recording from her palm. Trent noticed it again. That phone. That quiet lens now holds him accountable. For a half second, he considered backing off. But his ego was louder. He proceeded with the field test. Had her walk the line. Had her count backwards. Had her stand on one leg beneath a flickering street lamp. She passed it all. And yet he still scribbled a ticket. Failure to maintain lane. She took it without protest. Folded it once and placed it neatly beside her gear. No eye roll. No final word. Just a silence that said everything. Back in his patrol car, Trent felt a flicker of something he didn't name. Not guilt. Not yet. But a kind of friction. A resistance to the usual power flow. And that friction was just beginning to spread. Because Naomi didn't walk away quietly. She walked away intentionally. And behind the scenes, the ripple had already started. By the time Trent got back to the station, the encounter had already started to slip from his mind. He logged the citation like any other. Filed it under routine. Gave it a bland write-up, failure to maintain lane. Possible signs of impairment. No arrest. No mention of her tone. Her ID. Her composure. He dropped the body cam into the dock without reviewing the footage. Just another night, another driver, another box checked. In the break room, he made light of it. "Lady tried to pull rank on me," he said, cracking open a soda. "Flashed her federal ID like that was supposed to impress me." Officer Ana Reyes raised an eyebrow from across the room. "Wait. She was military. So she says. Had that stiff posture. The voice, you know. Probably some logistics paper pusher." Reyes sat up straighter. "Did she say her name?" Trent shrugged. "Carter. Naomi Carter." Reyes paused. "Major Naomi Carter." That name made something flicker in the air between them. "I think she gave a keynote at the academy last year," Reyes said slowly. "Fort Wayne. High up in operations. 2 tours. She's the real deal." Trent scoffed. "Don't care if she's a 4-star general. On the road, I'm the authority." But even as he said it, a thread of tension pulled at the edges of his confidence. It wasn't a doubt, not yet. Just a subtle shift in how the room felt. Reyes didn't push further, but she didn't nod either. Trent brushed it off. Went about his shift. Traffic stops. Minor calls. No one mentioned the incident again that night. But the silence wasn't dismissal. It was watching. Because, unlike him, Reyes didn't forget the name. And unlike him, Naomi wasn't waiting for someone else to take the next step. She'd already filed the complaint. Not just with Internal Affairs, but with the Office of the Inspector General. And more than that, she had backup. The video was already in the hands of her legal team. And quietly, efficiently, it had begun making its way through military channels. Trent thought the stop had ended when he handed her the citation. He didn't realize it had only just begun. In her office the next morning, Naomi Carter reviewed the footage again. Not because she needed reassurance, but because precision mattered. She wasn't preparing a scandal. She was building a case. Every frame of the video was catalogued, his tone, his posture, the way his hand hovered too long near his holster, even when she was compliant. Every detail had a time code. A context. A purpose. Sergeant Malik Owen stood quietly beside her, watching the footage without comment. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. "Want me to loop in the base attorney?" "Already done," Naomi said. Her voice held that same steady cadence. "I'm also submitting the footage to the Inspector General's office." Owens nodded. "You sure you want to go that far?" Naomi looked up. "This isn't about me. It's about every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet just to stay safe." Her tone didn't rise. But it didn't waver either. She wasn't filing the complaint because of one bad night. She was filing it because of the ease with which that night happened. And because she knew, if she didn't do something, he'd do it again. Her legal advisor, Attorney Rachel Lynn, reviewed the documents that afternoon. There may be grounds for a federal violation. If he initiated a search or field test without cause, especially against a government vehicle, there are legal consequences. Naomi nodded. "I'm prepared." Lynn studied her a moment longer. "You know it could get public. Messy." "I'm not looking for a fight," Naomi said. "But I won't accept silence, either." That line became her anchor. The report was filed by the end of the day. The footage accompanied it. Not dramatized. Not edited. Just the truth, clean, crisp, irrefutable. Meanwhile, back at the station, Officer Kyle Trent was back on shift. Business as usual. But the room didn't feel the same. The glances were different. The air is heavier. And somewhere beneath his usual confidence, a crack had started to form. Because a woman he had underestimated had just pressed the first domino. And everything he leaned on, the badge, the silence, the system, was about to be tested. The footage didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It moved silently, sent through encrypted emails, passed hand to hand, screen to screen, across legal desks, between military commands, into inboxes that didn't ignore things like this. Within 48 hours, the Inspector General's office responded. A formal case number was issued. The base legal counsel requested additional context. A quiet but focused inquiry was launched, not loud, but active. At Fort Wayne, Naomi didn't change her routine. She still led morning briefs. Still checked convoy rosters. Still reviewed personnel files and deployment statuses. To anyone watching from a distance, she hadn't flinched. But beneath the surface, the gears had shifted. Attorney Rachel Lynn was thorough. She compiled timelines, documented procedures, researched federal transportation policy, and paired every policy code with Naomi's recorded footage. It wasn't just about one officer making a mistake, it was about how the system responded when the mistake was made against someone who understood the system better than most. Within military legal circles, Naomi Carter's name wasn't unknown. She had commanded overseas units, navigated post-disaster logistics, and managed multi-agency coordination across 4 continents. She was respected, not because she demanded it, but because she never used her rank as a weapon. And now, that very rank, calmly carried, quietly earned, was the thing that gave her complaint weight no one could ignore. The internal conversation shifted from, "Was this misconduct?" to, "How many times has this happened without anyone saying a word?" Naomi didn't answer that. She didn't need to. She knew exactly how often silence had been the safest strategy. But she also knew why this time was different. Because she hadn't reacted. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made it emotional. She had made it official. And the ripple that started from her phone screen was just beginning to reach the shoreline. Officer Kyle Trent had no idea. No idea that his name had already appeared in formal documents headed for oversight review. No idea that someone had begun piecing together prior complaints, ones that had been quietly closed, dismissed, or buried under bureaucratic weight. He was back in uniform. Back on shift. The same routine. Same posture. Same bite in his voice when someone hesitated during a stop. He hadn't watched the footage. Hadn't asked about the name on the ID. Hadn't considered for one moment that a person like Naomi Carter might be anything more than a line item in his daily report. In the break room, his confidence hadn't dimmed. "Think she's still mad about the ticket," he joked to Officer Talbot. "Didn't even arrest her. I was nice." Talbot offered a half smile, but didn't echo the joke. That was happening more often now. The laughs didn't land the way they used to. The conversations ended sooner. And once or twice, he caught someone glancing at him, not with admiration, but calculation. Still, Trent didn't connect the dots. Didn't realize the body cam footage had already been flagged for review. Didn't realize the department's legal counsel had scheduled a quiet internal meeting the following week. Didn't realize that his file, once left untouched, was now being updated in real time. Because he believed the same thing that had protected him for years would keep protecting him now: time, silence, and the shield of a badge. But Naomi Carter wasn't letting this one go. And more importantly, she wasn't alone. Her legal team had looped in military liaisons, cross-agency compliance officers, and 2 retired colonels willing to testify on the professional standards violated by Trent's behavior. What had started as a routine citation was becoming something else entirely. Something measured. Something methodical. Something built not out of revenge, but purpose. And Officer Kyle Trent, still sure he had the upper hand, had no clue how close he was to losing control. It wasn't a memo. It was an envelope. Plain. Unmarked, except for the seal from Lucas County Civil Court and the typed name, Officer Kyle Trent. He tore it open in the parking lot outside the precinct, expecting a routine subpoena or department-wide update. But the words stopped him cold. Notice to appear. Plaintiff, Major Naomi Carter. Charge, violation of constitutional rights during a traffic stop. Unlawful detainment. Abuse of authority. Procedural misconduct. His first instinct was to laugh. "No way this sticks," he muttered under his breath. No way. But something inside him, the same instinct that told him when a stop would go sideways, flickered. He walked inside slower than usual. At his desk, there was no welcome. No banter. And then the captain called his name. Trent. Office. Now. Captain Ellis Monroe didn't waste time. The blinds were drawn. The door shut tight. She filed a complaint, Monroe said. Formal. Attached footage. Her attorneys have already contacted the department's legal counsel. Trent scoffed. She's trying to play victim. No, Monroe replied evenly. She's playing by the book. And you're in that book, Kyle. She wasn't even arrested. You didn't need to arrest her. You escalated. You failed to justify the test. And now it's all on video. Trent didn't reply. For the first time, he didn't have a response. Do you even know who she is? Monroe continued. She's not some random motorist. She's a lieutenant colonel with 2 deployments, multiple commendations, and command-level clearance. Still, Trent didn't speak. Her uniform's clean. Her record's flawless. And the way you handled it? Monroe's voice tightened. This won't disappear. There was no threat in his tone. Just a fact. Outside the office, the hallway felt longer. The stairs become sharper. The space is smaller. The shield Trent once wore so confidently, the one made of silence, habit, and reputation, was beginning to crack. And somewhere at Fort Wayne, Naomi Carter was already reviewing the next steps with her counsel. Not to win. Not to punish. But to ensure that the next woman, the next soldier, the next person in that same situation wouldn't have to record just to be believed. Kyle Trent still didn't believe it would go anywhere. A complaint? Sure. He'd seen dozens. Most didn't even reach the disciplinary board. A notice to appear? Fine. He'd show up, say a few words, and walk out with a shrug. That was the world he knew. Where things blew over. Where the procedure was flexible. Where authority was assumed, especially when no one fought back. But Captain Ellis Monroe wasn't laughing. In the privacy of his office, Monroe reviewed the footage himself. Both angles. Naomi's phone and Trent's body cam. He watched it twice. And the second time, he didn't look at Trent. He looked at her. The way she kept her voice level. At the way her posture never faltered. At how she never once lost control, even as the situation escalated without cause. He saw the restraint. And he saw the problem. Trent had acted like someone untouchable. Like his word was final. Like questions were considered insubordination. And now, those assumptions had names, timestamps, and legal counsel. Monroe called a quiet meeting with the precinct's internal affairs liaison. Asked for prior complaints. Pulled Trent's file. It was thick. Nothing criminal. Nothing explosive. Just a pattern. Sharp tone. Overuse of authority. Dismissive attitude. Enough to raise eyebrows. Especially now. Still, Trent carried himself the same way. Same stride through the hallways. Same clipped jokes. But the responses had shifted. People nodded more slowly. Some didn't nod at all. And Officer Ana Reyes, who once laughed along, didn't even look at him when he passed her desk. He noticed. And for the first time, it bothered him. Not enough to apologize. Not enough to reflect. but enough to make him wonder who was still on his side. Officer Ana Reyes didn't say anything for days. Not to Trent. Not to Monroe. Not even to herself. But the footage haunted her. She'd watched it in silence, headphones in, volume low, posture still. And by the time the clip ended, she felt something she hadn't felt in years on this job, shame. Not because she'd done anything, but because she'd seen it before. Different faces. Different names. Same tone. Same imbalance. And too many times, no one said anything. That changed when she leaned across the hallway divider and whispered to Officer Banks, "You know who she is?" "Who?" "Major Naomi Carter." Banks blinked. "That's the woman from the stop." Ana nodded. "Fort Wayne Command. Logistics lead. Ran point on convoy relief during the last hurricane. Joint force clearance. Lectured at Quantico last year." Banks stared. That Carter? The one and only. The silence between them thickened. Because suddenly, the narrative shifted. She wasn't just a driver with a federal plate. She was a decorated officer. A strategist. A woman who'd moved troops, stabilized operations, and briefed generals. And the man who pulled her over treated her like an unruly teenager who forgot to use a blinker. Ana stood by the window that evening, watching Trent laugh with another officer in the lot. His shoulders were relaxed. Confident. Like nothing had changed. But it had. And she wasn't the only one who felt it. Across the station, quiet conversations had started to form, low voices in hallways, glances at desks, names searched on secure terminals. Naomi Carter was no longer anonymous. And the case was no longer just about one stop. It had become a mirror. One that forced them all to look a little closer at the lines they'd grown comfortable crossing, or ignoring. And now, with the court date approaching, Ana knew this wouldn't be another closed file. This one had teeth. And Naomi Carter wasn't chasing vindication. She was building precedent. In a quiet conference room 2 states away, Major Naomi Carter sat across from her attorney, Rachel Lynn. A laptop played the footage again, muted now, but vivid in memory. Trent's voice. His stance. His unearned command. Rachel tapped her pen once against a legal pad. "They'll argue standard procedure." Naomi nodded. "Let them. They'll say you passed the field test. That you weren't detained. That you weren't physically harmed." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "That's the point. They'll try to measure harm by bruises. I measure it by dignity." Rachel leaned back, watching her closely. "You sure you want this public?" Naomi folded her arms. "I've stayed quiet in rooms I outranked for years. Not anymore." There was no pride in her voice. Just resolve. She had led convoys through combat zones. Made split-second decisions that saved lives. Managed missions where a single oversight meant catastrophe. But none of that mattered on that roadside in Toledo. Because of Trent, she wasn't a leader. She was a profile. A silhouette. An inconvenience that didn't yield fast enough. And now, that moment, recorded, reviewed, undeniable was heading for court. Rachel clicked the laptop closed. "We'll file a civil rights claim, abuse of authority, unlawful detainment, violation of federal protections under Title 42. He didn't have probable cause. You were in a government vehicle. Your ID was dismissed. Your questions are treated as threats. Naomi nodded once. I want a record. Rachel paused. You're not after damages. No, Naomi said. I want something someone can point to the next time this happens. Not to make a statement. To make a standard. Back at the station, the atmosphere had shifted further. Captain Monroe now moved with quiet calculation. Internal Affairs had scheduled a departmental review. Every officer who shared a shift with Trent was asked to submit incident summaries from the past 12 months. The system wasn't just watching. It was reacting. And for the first time in his career, Kyle Trent wasn't setting the tone. He was waiting for the tone to shift around him. The courthouse wasn't loud. There were no protest signs. No reporters are crowding the steps. Just the heavy stillness of consequence. Naomi Carter arrived 15 minutes early. Not out of nerves, but habit. Punctuality had been a constant in her life, one of many quiet disciplines she'd cultivated through decades of service. She wore her full dress uniform. Not to impress. To clarify. The rank on her chest wasn't a costume. It was earned. And today, it was context. Inside the prep room, Rachel Lynn adjusted her files. You understand the opposing counsel will try to minimize. Naomi nodded. They'll frame it as a misunderstanding. Rachel glanced at her. And we won't let them. They've been over it a dozen times. The footage. The transcripts. The policies. The silence between Trent's words. The way he used volume as leverage. The refusal to answer basic questions. The forced field test with no probable cause. It wasn't just misconduct. It was dismissal. A trained officer encountering a federal employee and still choosing to treat her like a suspect, because she didn't fold. Because she asked. Naomi hadn't spoken publicly about the case. Not once. But today wasn't about silence. It was about the record. When she stepped into the courtroom, the shift was immediate. Not loud. Not visible. But felt. The bailiff stood straighter. The clerk's tone softened. Even the judge paused, eyes scanning the ribbons on her chest before nodding slightly. Across the aisle, Kyle Trent sat beside his attorney, stiff in a charcoal suit, jaw set tight. He didn't smirk. He didn't speak. He just watched. Naomi didn't look at him. She focused forward, on the bench, the jury box, the truth. Rachel whispered, opening statements will be brief. But the footage will speak for itself. Naomi's voice was steady. Let it speak. Rachel Lynn's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, this is not a case about harm you can see. It's about harm that happens when power goes unchecked. When silence becomes policy. When a person is treated as a threat, not because of what they've done, but because of how they carry themselves. She gestured toward Naomi. Major Carter complied with every request. She identified herself. She followed instructions. And yet she was ordered from her vehicle without cause, subjected to an unnecessary field test, and issued a citation despite no indication of wrongdoing. Then came the footage. First, the phone video. The courtroom held still as Naomi's voice filled the speakers, clear, calm, composed. Then the body cam. Kyle Trent's posture. His clipped tone. The light in Naomi's face. His hand, too close to his holster. The moment he opened her door without consent. The field test under the street lamp. Her flawless execution. The ticket, issued anyway. The room didn't react outwardly. But the shift was felt. No murmurs. No side glances. Just stillness. The judge cleared his throat before nodding toward the defense. Counsel. Kyle's attorney, a man named James Brack, stood slowly. His tone was measured. We acknowledge the footage. We acknowledge the tension. But we remind the court, Officer Trent was acting within the scope of discretion. Field tests are not uncommon when erratic driving is suspected. His actions, while perhaps rigid, were not unlawful. Naomi didn't flinch. Because this was the script she expected. Minimize. Redirect. Normalize. But it wouldn't hold. Not this time. Rachel stood again. We're not arguing discretion exists. We're arguing that discretion without discipline becomes discrimination. And that line landed. It echoed softly against the wood-paneled walls. It anchored something. The judge called for a recess. Naomi stepped outside the courtroom into the corridor. Her hand rested calmly at her side. Behind her, Rachel whispered, "They felt that." Naomi didn't smile. But she nodded. Because clarity wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it arrived in quiet lines that cut clean through defense. When Naomi took the stand, the room leaned forward, not physically, but perceptibly. Like gravity had shifted toward her. She didn't adjust the microphone. Didn't clear her throat. She simply answered. I was driving back from a planning meeting, she began. Roughly 11:15. I was not speeding. Not swerving. I was not impaired. Rachel approached with a deliberate pace. What happened next? I was pulled over by Officer Trent. I complied. When asked for my license and registration, I provided both. I informed him I was a federal employee, operating a government vehicle. Did you raise your voice at any point? No. Did you resist any commands? No. Why did you begin recording? Naomi looked at the jury, steady. Because I've lived long enough to know that silence doesn't protect you. Documentation does. Rachel gave a small nod. What message do you believe Officer Trent was sending by making you exit the vehicle? That my words didn't matter. That my credentials didn't matter. That my presence wasn't enough to be respected, only to be suspected. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was weight. Brack rose for cross-examination, his tone polite but pointed. Major Carter, are you suggesting officers should not be allowed to act on instinct? I'm suggesting instinct must be checked by training and purpose, she said. Would you say Officer Trent acted out of malice? No. I'd say he acted out of habit. Brack blinked. Habit? The kind built in environments where questioning is treated as disrespect. Where compliance isn't enough, it has to look the way they expect. And with that, her testimony ended. She stepped down, not triumphant, not broken, just present. Entirely present. In his seat, Kyle Trent didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't centered on him. It revolved around the question he never thought he'd have to answer. What happens when the person you tried to reduce stands taller than the system that once protected you? The video played again. Not for effect. For clarity. First, Naomi's phone. Then the body cam. Frame by frame, the courtroom revisited the stop, each second layered with context, weight, and a precision that testimony alone couldn't carry. Officer Trent's voice, sharp, unquestioned, cut through the speakers. Naomi's responses, measured, professional, followed like anchors. The light in her face. The hand near his weapon. The unannounced door opening. The field test that never should have happened. And finally, the ticket, signed, handed off, and dismissed without explanation. No one in the courtroom spoke. Not the jury. Not the clerk. Not the captain from Fort Wayne who sat silently in the gallery, his uniform jacket folded in his lap. It wasn't spectacular. It was reality. And when the video ended, Rachel Lynn rose slowly. "No further evidence is needed," she said. "Because it's already in the room. And it's undeniable." Brack made one last attempt to reframe. Officer Trent followed department training. His discretion was based on visual behavior consistent with impairment. The judge interrupted. "But no signs of impairment were confirmed?" "No, Your Honor." "Thank you. Proceed." Rachel turned to Naomi one last time. "Major Carter, if you could leave this court with one sentence, one truth you want this record to hold, what would it be?" Naomi didn't hesitate. "Power," she said, "is not a shield. It's a responsibility." That line didn't need an echo. It landed exactly as it was, undiluted. And the jury heard it. The judge heard it. Even Kyle Trent, who hadn't shifted all day, looked away for the first time. Because this wasn't about the legality of a stop. It was about the integrity of how it happened. And for the first time, that integrity had a name. The courtroom felt heavier with each passing minute. Not because of drama, but density. Like something long overdue was finally being held in place. Rachel Lynn stepped forward for closing arguments. Her voice was low, steady, unmistakably certain. "We ask ourselves what justice looks like. We ask whether law enforcement can act on instinct, on training, on situational urgency. And they can. They must. But that ability," she turned slightly, scanning the jury, "must come with boundaries. And when it doesn't, we don't just risk the law, we risk the trust that upholds it." She paused. Major Carter wasn't a threat. She wasn't evasive. She was deliberate. She followed every instruction. And in return, she was treated with suspicion, silence, and escalation. She let the silence sit before continuing. "This case is not about punishing one man. It's about defining what accountability means when the cameras are on, and more importantly, when they're not." Across the aisle, Trent stared straight ahead. His attorney's notes are untouched. His hands folded tighter than before. He hadn't expected this. Not the detail. Not the resonance. Not the sheer, unmistakable presence Naomi had brought to that courtroom, not in voice, but in poise. The defense offered a final rebuttal, but it barely stirred the room. The judge dismissed both parties. Jury deliberation began. Outside the courtroom, Rachel turned to Naomi. "It's in their hands now." Naomi simply nodded. She wasn't restless. She wasn't detached. She was ready. Because this wasn't about a verdict. It was about the record. Back in the gallery, quiet conversations whispered between Fort Wayne officers and civilian observers. People who didn't know each other didn't come for the same reasons, but now sat aligned in one truth. They'd seen it happen. And they couldn't unsee it. The jury took 3 days. Not because the evidence was unclear, but because the weight of it demanded care. When they returned, the courtroom was still. No uniforms in the gallery. No cameras flashing. Just Naomi, Rachel, and a few quiet supporters, military and civilian, scattered throughout the benches. Kyle Trent sat rigid, as he had every day, but the mask was thinner now. His jaw moved slightly. Not speaking, grinding. Judge Marlene Santos shuffled the verdict papers. No theatrics. Just process. In the matter of Carter versus Trent, she began, the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff. No sound. No gasp. Just that sentence, flat and final. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights. Specifically, the absence of probable cause, the misuse of discretionary power, and a failure to conduct the stop by professional standards. Trent's attorney leaned in, whispered something clipped. Trent didn't react. The court orders the following: damages for $35,000 to the plaintiff, and the permanent recording of this verdict on Officer Trent's service record. Additionally, this ruling will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for further internal review. Rachel closed her folder. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't shift in her seat. She just inhaled once, slow, full, precise, and nodded. Not to the judge. Not to the jury. To herself. She had come for one thing. Clarity. And she had it. Outside, reporters were just beginning to gather, small local outlets, nothing national yet. But even so, Trent slipped down the courthouse steps, head low, folder shielding his face. He didn't offer a statement. Didn't claim victory. Just disappeared into the parking lot. Inside, Naomi stayed a moment longer. She didn't take photos. She didn't speak to the press. She opened her phone, read the alert, verdict, in your favor. Case closed. Rachel caught up beside her. You could have asked for more. Naomi exhaled slowly. It was never about the money. Rachel looked at her. You think it'll change anything? Naomi glanced toward the courthouse doors. I don't know, she said. But maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice. The verdict rippled faster than the filing. Within 24 hours, the Toledo Police Department announced a formal internal review. The phrase was clinical. But behind closed doors, the shift was seismic. Officer Kyle Trent was placed on administrative leave. No charges filed. No badge stripped. But the hallway glances told a different story now. He wasn't the one people turned to for advice. He wasn't the man whose voice filled the silence of morning shift meetings. Now, they stepped around him. Conversation stalled when he entered the room. No one said it to his face, but the foundation had cracked. The badge didn't carry the same weight it used to. Not because of a policy. Because of a precedent. Captain Monroe kept his remarks minimal. We are reviewing the court's decision in full. Appropriate actions will follow. It was the kind of statement designed to buy time. But the silence beneath it wasn't the kind that waits. It was the kind that watches. Trent returned to his desk once, just once, to clear it out. No one offered help. Not even Reyes. He glanced around the room, maybe expecting someone to pull him aside, say something comforting, familiar. But no one did. He'd worn that confidence like armor for years. But now, it clinked when he walked. Back at Fort Wayne, Naomi didn't mention the case. Didn't bring up the court. Didn't reference the verdict. She returned to her routines, her briefings, her command. But people knew. The story had reached across bases quietly but efficiently. And even without her speaking, her presence spoke volumes. Because she'd stood in uniform not just to defend herself, but to remind everyone what discipline under pressure truly looked like. The change at Fort Wayne wasn't loud. It arrived in small shifts. Newer recruits started showing up to morning drills a few minutes earlier. They sat straighter in briefings. They watched Naomi Carter more closely, not out of fear, but focus. She didn't mention the trial. Didn't reference what happened. But her posture had changed something. In the dining hall, whispers surfaced, not about the verdict, but about values. She didn't raise her voice once, one soldier murmured. Still made the whole system move, another replied. They weren't talking about power. They were talking about an example. Naomi didn't bask in it. She stayed on task. Reviewed transport schedules. Ran contingency exercises. Signed off on rotation rosters. Her command style hadn't shifted, measured, exacting, fair, but the respect had deepened. Not because she won a case. Because she proved you could stand your ground without losing your balance. Her aide, Sergeant Malik Owens, caught her one evening outside the logistics hub. The sun was low. The lot is emptying. Ma'am, he said, quietly, just wanted to say, you changed things. Whether they admit it or not. Naomi didn't respond right away. Then, I didn't do it to change them. I did it so they wouldn't change me. He nodded. But they both knew. It had changed them. The quiet moments after. The space people gave her when she passed. The way a few of the junior officers now started taking notes differently, less about command, more about conduct. The lesson had landed. And it didn't need to be loud. Weeks passed. The courtroom faded from headlines, replaced by newer noise. But inside Fort Wayne, the lesson didn't fade. Naomi stood before a room of recruits, clean uniforms, fresh boots, eager eyes. She wasn't scheduled to speak that day. But she did. Not with a script. With presence. How many of you believe wearing this, she tapped the rank on her chest, automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up. Half confident. Half uncertain. She nodded slowly. That's fair. I thought that once, too. She let the silence rest. Just long enough to land. But the truth is, respect isn't granted by a patch. It's proven in how you carry it. The room stayed still. You'll face moments where your authority is tested. When your voice won't be the loudest. When the uniform won't be enough to shield you from assumptions. She paused. And in those moments, don't raise your voice. Raise your standard. No one moved. No pen scratched. It wasn't a silence of distraction. It was weight. Real weight. Naomi closed her folder. Serve with integrity. Lead with discipline. And remember, power isn't a shield. It's a responsibility. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't need it. She stepped down from the podium the same way she had stepped off that curb the night Trent pulled her over. With calm. With clarity. With the quiet kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, but never goes unnoticed. Major Naomi Carter didn't step onto the stage with fanfare. There were no dramatic pauses, no grand music, no spotlight chasing her into the room. Just her uniform. Just her presence. And that was enough. The recruits seated before her were fresh, most barely 6 weeks into basic training, still holding their posture like it might slip if they blinked. Their eyes followed her with that mix of curiosity and quiet uncertainty, not quite knowing what to expect but understanding that whoever she wasn't here to waste their time. Naomi didn't open with credentials. She didn't list deployments or cite the chain of command. Instead, she asked a question. How many of you believe a uniform earns you automatic respect? Hands rose. Not all of them, but enough. She nodded, slowly. That's fair. I get why you think that. We've been taught to associate the patch, the rank, the badge with authority. But the truth is, none of that guarantees respect. It demands something deeper. There was no slideshow behind her, no written agenda. Just her voice, measured and deliberate, carrying evenly across the space. Respect isn't owed. It's proven, through consistency, through restraint, through how you carry power when no one's watching. A few recruits exchanged glances. Others just stared. Naomi continued, voice steady. Some of you will be in positions where you give orders. Some of you will face people who challenge you. And there will come a time when the power you hold, your badge, your rank, will feel like a shield. She let that land before adding, but power isn't a shield. It's a weight. And now, the silence was real. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. Because her words didn't sound like something lifted from a handbook. They felt lived in, hard-earned. The kind of wisdom you don't memorize, you absorb. Naomi folded her arms, watching the room settle into what she was saying. What you do in the quiet moments, when there's no one to praise you, no one to punish you, defines who you are in this uniform more than any ribbon ever will. Naomi let the silence hold for a few seconds longer before she spoke again. Some of you may have heard about a case, about a stop, a citation, a courtroom. I won't rehash the headlines. But I'll tell you this, when I was pulled over that night, I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. She stepped forward, her voice not louder but clearer. Prepared not because I expected to be mistreated, but because I understood how quickly perception can override professionalism. There was a weight to her words, not in tone, but in truth. She wasn't lecturing them. She was offering them a choice. I could have gotten angry. I could have argued. I could have walked away, told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But that's what silence counts on, that good people will stay quiet to avoid discomfort. She paused, letting the words settle. I didn't speak up for myself. I spoke up for the next person, who might not wear a uniform, who might not have the rank, who might not have a camera or a lawyer or an audience. I filed the complaint. I testified. I carried the weight, so maybe they won't have to. A few heads nodded now, not out of habit, but from something deeper. understanding, respect. Naomi took a slow breath. Leadership isn't about proving you're right. It's about standing firm when you know something's wrong, and being willing to bear the discomfort of doing what's right, even when no one is clapping. She didn't mention Kyle Trent's name. She didn't have to. Because this wasn't about a man. It was about a mindset. A system. A culture. And a choice every one of them would have to make. When that moment comes, when the easy thing is to look away, I want you to remember this. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to prove your strength. But you do have to speak. Because silence doesn't protect you. It protects the problem. Naomi stepped away from the podium, not with a dramatic turn or a waiting pause for applause, but with the same quiet certainty that had carried her through the entire journey. She gathered her notes, though she hadn't looked at them once, and turned back to the room one last time. Lead with character. Serve with integrity. And remember, when you wear the uniform, you don't just represent yourself. You represent every person who came before you, and every person who's watching what you'll do next. The recruits didn't clap. They didn't need to. They sat still, faces straight, but the difference was in their eyes. Not awe. Not fear. But focus, the kind that settles when a truth lands somewhere deeper than training manuals and mission briefings. As Naomi walked off stage, Sergeant Owens waited by the door, hands behind his back. He didn't say anything, but the nod he gave her wasn't one of protocol, it was acknowledgement. Outside, the sunlight cut sharply across the training yard. A few soldiers were drilling in formation, feet pounding in unison, not knowing what had just shifted inside. Naomi looked up, breathed deep, and let the moment go. Because she hadn't stood in front of that room for applause. She'd stood there to leave something behind. Something stronger than a verdict. Quieter than a protest. But deeper than either. And if her words found their way into even one decision, one hesitation before abuse, one voice choosing to speak, one act of restraint, then the weight she carried would have done its job. If you've come this far with her story, thank you. If it made you think, share it. If it stirred something, don't let it settle. Speak up. Stand firm. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. Let's make sure they're heard.